Everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we have been going for quite some time into the massive currency swaps around the world outside of the US world reserve currency. There is a clear and present danger approaching the US dollar that is going to cause a global panic, a domino effect around the world, and it will affect basically every country in the world. But I think it's really important to mention at the very beginning, all fiat currencies eventually revert to their true value of zero. Always have, always will, going back to 1024 AD in China, and this time won't be any different. They can put it off a bit longer. Their powers to centralize are a bit greater, but it all just props up a dead horse, makes it bloated, and makes it heavier when it comes down crashing on everyone else. And we've reported on, how Russia is kind of rejecting the US dollar, though they say we're not rejecting the US dollar. The US dollar is rejecting us, so we're not using it. We've seen pushes for Saudi Arabia to just trade oil with China in the yuan. There's a lot of examples around the world of currency swapping, and we went into a video I think a year and a half ago breaking down dozens of them. But for now, let's just go into this article from RT, which is from December 9th. So you might say it's an older story, but I think this is something that I didn't see enough people reporting on this, and I think it's important that we break this down for everyone because it is incredibly important and it signifies a major move being made, a major power shift throughout the world away from the US world reserve currency, which depends only on faith, and that faith is being lost. And what's going to happen then? Well, we know what's going to happen then. Anyway, this RT article says, bye-bye dollar. India and UAE agree to trade in local currencies. And as the article goes into, New Delhi and Abu Dhabi have inked a currency swap agreement to boost trade and investment without involvement of a third party like the US dollar. The swap is for an amount of 2 billion UAE dirham or 35 billion Indian rupees or US $495 million, according to the Indian embassy in Abu Dhabi. And I quote, the bilateral currency swap agreement between India and UAE is expected to reduce the dependency on hard currencies like the US dollar, the embassy said. It is also expected to give a push for the local currencies of the two nations and may reduce the impact of volatility in exchange rate arising from the dependency on a third currency. It is also expected to reduce the transmission costs arising from exchange rate risk, the embassy added. The sides also discussed cooperation in energy, security trade, investments, space defense, and so on. With more than $50 billion in bilateral trade, the two countries are each other's largest trade partners. India's foreign direct investment into the UAE was $6.6 billion in 2017, while the UAE's investment in India stood at $5.8 billion. UAE is the sixth largest oil exporter for India, with non-oil trade between them accounting for $34 billion. Earlier this year, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC, and an Indian consortium led by the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, ONGC, signed a 10% offshore concession agreement giving Indian companies the opportunity to develop Abu Dhabi's offshore oil fields, which produce about 1.4 million barrels of oil per day. ADNOC is also investing in India's $44 billion Ratnagiri petrochemical complex in cooperation with Saudi Aramco. It is exploring the possibility of storing its crude oil at Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserves Limited, their underground oil storage facility at Padur in Karnataka. So anyway, John, this is major news because it's going to, it signifies a push away from the US dollar, as we said, and it shows its dwindling significance on the world stage, as I do believe there's a big shift towards China and India, especially from the digital centrally planned cashless society perspective, though it's kind of failing in India. But yeah, India is the second most populated country in the world, huge population, huge power player on a global stage when it comes to trading when it comes to oil, and across the board, all sorts of different industries. India is a very, very strategic country when it comes to growth in jobs and industries that have been growing at a rapid scale for a long time, though it's been, there have been pushes by government in recent years by Modi that have kind of pushed away from that to an extent, but still India remains one of the stronger countries in the world. So can you go into the significance of this for the US dollar and what it really means and why it's happening?
Well, why it's happening is because everybody is trying to get away from the US dollar. They see that the US cannot pay back their basically close to $22 trillion worth of debt right now that the government has. And of course, 6 trillion of that is overseas, 6 trillion plus, and it's dwindling.
And they're only paying off the interest on the debt.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole scam behind this, is if anybody else tried to pay off the interest on any debt for a substantial period of time, the bank would say like, hey, are you not able to pay your debt or what? What's going on? Give me that money back. I don't trust you anymore. Well, no, that doesn't work in the big country world, because they just have a gun pointed at you. It's like, don't you dare try to say that to me.
They're organized crime.
Yeah, exactly. A massive crime racket. But again, just looking at China, because China is one of the competitors here. I have some stats here, not stats, but just countries that China currently have a renminbi swap with, so they actually trade with renminbis between these countries and not use dollars. There is Argentina, Belarus, Brazil, Hong Kong, Iceland, Indonesia, Malaysia, Russia, Singapore, South Korea, United Kingdom, and Uzbekistan. And then South Korea and Indonesia have a cross-currency swap. Japan and India has one. So you're seeing a lot of these countries are moving away from the US dollar as a medium of exchange. And the reason B is because of the mass amounts of debt, that the United States have accumulated. And everybody's seen that there's no way back with the United States dollar. And as the oldest debt is coming back to the United States, about 6 trillion, that is going to have to trickle into the economy somehow when everybody is starting to sell off. It just takes Japan or China, one of the majors. If they sell off all the debt, that will collapse the United States very fast, because the trust in the US dollar as the world reserve currency and as a stable currency, stable coin of the world, that is going to crumble within its feet, Josh.
And I mean, as the embassy said in this case, in this story, their idea is to get away from the US dollar. As I said, the bilateral currency swap agreement between India and UAE is expected to reduce the dependency on hard currencies like the US dollar. They're openly saying this is what the whole plan is. And we also have to remember the work that, of course, India and places like China are doing with the United Nations and the IMF, and the push towards, being the next world reserve currency. It's no doubt their wish. I mean, India and China have been kind of clashing with each other over this, but India and China are both trying to develop that centrally planned cashless system. China more so than India, to the extent where they have facial recognition police goggles, where you have social credit scores. It's like totally Orwellian.
They're basically blatant communists, so of course they're going to be a little bit more ahead than India is. Yeah,
and they're pushing towards more of a voting right in China for the special drawing rights at the IMF, and the IMF is talking about putting their headquarters in Beijing in the coming years.
Yeah, it's the BRICS countries. So the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and they have pretty close to now the same voting power. That bloc has the same voting power in the IMF as the United States, and they're trying to get above that, so they have the veto power over the United States, and then it's game over for the United States having control over the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. But what you also got to remember, Josh, is meanwhile these guys are trying to gain the power into the economy. India and China, they have also blown some of the most epic debt bubbles in the world on top of that. For example, India has the worst amount of non-performing loans in the world. They're even worse than Italy itself. That is supposed to be the worst one. I think they're 4 or 5%. You did a video on it back not too long ago, Josh.
I do a lot of videos.
Yeah, I do too many videos on all this crazy stuff, but it has to be covered because it's so important to the livelihood of people in those countries, and just to understand. But I think the problem is they are trying to take over and become the next world reserve currency, and China is the best one right now because China doesn't take on a lot of US dollar denominated debt, so they have been just printing their own, so they're more powerful to just keep on printing in their Keynesian destructive world that they have, so they could keep on for way longer than someone like India that is more dependent on US dollars than China, for example. But it's a massive bubble, Josh. It's just epic beyond any proportions, and they're continuing to do this every single day, just constantly printing more money into, and the country is turning into, a banana republic. All the world, all the central banks are turning into banana republics because of these idiots thinking that they could just print themselves out of any problem in the world.
And that's the problem around the world with basically every country, every central bank. That's the problem with central planning and the quantitative easing and the fractional reserve lending and all the craziness in the banking system and the debt dependency and all that. And we have to also remember that people in India are not too happy with their own government either. They're really getting restless with all this push towards cashless when, everyone historically has used cash in India. Yeah. But also I wanted to bring something into context here that I feel like we're seeing a lot of people talk about interest rates recently in the United States without understanding what they are. And yeah, they are going up equivalent to so interest rates until in 2008 started going down dramatically, hit rock bottom around the same day that Obama was elected in 2008, and then just kind of dwindled and bounced up and down for a little while, barely made any moves. And now the second Trump was elected, it was like up, 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 up. And people are saying there's a correlation, and there is likely a correlation, as we did a video about 2 days after the election in 2016, which YouTube took down, talking about how they're going to crash the economy and blame it on Trump. But it was a natural thing that was going to happen anyway, because the Federal Reserve was going to push interest rates up in order to avoid going into negative interest rates. They had to drop, I think, about 5.5% in 2008 in order to actually survive going into negative interest rates. Now they're going up like crazy. Crazy for the Federal Reserve in the last 10 years. And what's really going to come out of this is that they are preparing to have to drop out interest rates dramatically. Of course, it's nothing compared to the 1980s. Yeah, we always get those comments, of course, but it doesn't make it any less significant when you consider the ramifications of this massive global currency crisis that's on our doorsteps right now, and them dropping out interest rates drastically to try and they're trying to push it up so they don't go negative. And I believe that out of desperation, they're pushing this cashless system, no bail-ins, no ability to protect yourself from bail-ins or money's in the bank. It's always the banks, and it's never yours, and you are enslaved to the banking system. This is a huge, huge scheme to push people into further debt subservience, despite these problems arising that are really affecting the central banking system, and they're getting worried. They're getting scared. We go from Janet Yellen saying we won't see another currency crisis in our lifetime to like a few weeks ago, it looks like we might be seeing another currency crisis.
Thing since history has happened.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of examples on the stock market as well, where we're seeing it crash down to huge, massive losses, like the likes of which we haven't seen since 2008, and in some cases as far back as 1931 in a week period. And then we see a little bounce up on December 26th, and everyone gets super excited, and then it starts going down December 27th again. My point is that this system is on its last legs because it's losing faith. It's always been based on investor speculation and confidence on the stock market and faith for the monetary system worldwide, and it's losing faith worldwide. Investor confidence is dropping out. It's going into a bear market in the stock market. The dollar has lost most of its value, and we're getting to a point where people are waking up to this, and there are options, alternatives. People are breaking outside of the system to save themselves, and the financial system is panicking, and they're doing whatever they can to make sure that they can actually gain or keep some relevance in the world going forward, because without that, they can't have control of the people. Without that, they can't gain so much off of war and poverty and debt subservience and all that kind of stuff. They are panicking because they are losing control of you, and you need to ensure that they lose control of you, that they cannot control you, that you rule yourself, that you control yourself, that you don't allow these massive banking cartels and government cartels to rule over you and completely push you into debt subservience. As I haven't said in a while here at WHAM, it's like shoving you down a bottomless pit of debt, and you're forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and banking system, pushing you in perfect servitude to them exactly where they want you. And yeah, they're pouring what? Wet concrete on you?
Dirt and the concrete and everything on you as you're trying to climb up.
Yeah. So John, you're still looking at some charts here. As we kind of start to wrap up the video, what are you looking at?
Well, this is the end of the U.S. empire here. We can see clearly that they have pushed down the interest rate so far, like a 30-year, bond bull market that we had, with interest rates just getting lower and lower and lower. And every crises that you've seen throughout history, they drop it, anywhere from, this is from my presentation I did in California, and you can look at the video that we have up, but it drops between 5 to 10% every time during a crisis, the interest rates. But now they are struggling with just 0.25% interest rate hike, and you have Munchkin coming out and saying that, hey, everything is fine, there's no liquidity crisis. It's like, was there a liquidity crisis? Were there any banks in problems? It's just like they're trying to go out there and Trump is saying like, yeah, go out and buy stocks. This was the same that happened. Remember in 2001 during 9/11, I believe that was what tried to pull away from the dot-com bubble, because it was massive collapse. Gold and silver started to rise. So they and Bush said, go out and consume, buy as much as you can on credit and indebt yourself to save the United States dollar. And that's where we're back at again, the same scam that's continuing to go. And
every monetary crisis is followed by a war throughout the last 100 and something years. I mean, World War I, the Korean War, obviously the Great Depression. Then, of course, there's a Korean War, and then the Vietnam War, and then the 1987 crash, which was followed by, wars in Iraq and / Iran, and the lead
growth,
to
Josh.
2001 Iraq, Afghanistan, and then 2008. Libya, Yemen, into Syria. What's the next one? Well, I wonder. I don't know. But we almost forgot, though. We almost forgot that the Treasury, the yield curve is inverting, which is happening for the first time, and it's absolutely huge.
Not the first time, Josh. This happens every time there's a crisis. Of course,
I know, but the first time since the last crisis, and I think it's really important that most people are going to go the yield curve. What's that? Well, like the bond. The people 10-year bond, the 2-year and the 5-year, I believe, is inverting right now.
Well, the thing is, let me explain it very easily for you to understand. The yield curve is basically when the yield curve inverts, it actually becomes cheaper to have longer term debt than shorter term debt. Which shorter term debt should be way less riskier because you're taking it on for a shorter period of time. So it doesn't make sense at all. But that's what's happening is you have that inversion, and it distorts the markets completely, because what is behind it is the Fed is trying to raise interest rates here. Meanwhile, the other interest rates is just flatlining over here. So they're just completely distorting the markets with trying to manipulate them. And again, the United States is at the precipice of I believe the end of its final days of its empire, where you had in Rome, where they were just fed up with all the wars that they had, and then they just collapsed in on themselves and became a tiny little place. And I think that's what the United States is going to turn into. Hopefully there's good people there that will turn certain sections of the United States into good places where you have voluntarism taking root, and or either constitutional libertarianism, something that is not going to destroy the world that is there.
No organized crime.
Yeah, exactly. Not an empire, which is, of course, we got to be warning about China as well, because China is desperately wanting that. They want more power as well. So it's just, we got to educate people about freedom, Josh. And if people believe in this collectivist garbage that are getting spewed at them from the mainstream media, being used by the governments and the central bankers and the banksters to control everyone, we need to break through that and believe in the individual right of every single human being on this planet, and give the freedom back to humanity so we could actually be free instead of being constantly, policed and, being looked down at from these elitist garbage people.
Yeah. And I mean, in the end, the only ones that are buying those 10-year bonds and stuff are the Federal Reserve to begin with.
The
so
ESF and
all
others.
BS. It's all manipulative nonsense. Let's get into
Cayman Islands owns a whole bunch of treasury debt.
Yeah, and now let's get into the solutions real quick, because we can't go without the solutions. That's the most important part. And of course, it comes down to food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. Gold and silver to protect your purchasing power. Not investment advice. It's our opinion, but it's not meant as an investment. It's about protecting purchasing power, ensuring your wealth, folks. So remember that. Look out throughout history. It is incredibly prevalent. And of course, decentralized cryptocurrency technology, blockchain infrastructures that are truly decentralized. Do your own due diligence. There are ways, earth-shattering ways, to create alternatives on the free market without government coercion. And one way or another, whether you're a conservative, a liberal, an anarchist, a libertarian, it doesn't matter. In the end, this technology will prevail. And if we have control of it as an individual free market demand kind of situation, we will be able to break free from these systems with these alternatives. So we don't need governments. We don't need these banks. We can prevail without them. We can survive, and we will survive with incredible knowledge that will spread out into many different types of markets that will grow out of it, many employment opportunities, many things that will grow the world into a beautiful free place. But we have to understand these things, be educated, responsible, self-sustainable, independent. All those things are incredibly important. Stop being dependent. That's where they want you, folks. Anyway, John, we'll get back to you guys with much more. There's lots for us to talk about here at WAM. And anyways, until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth.
Be the change.
Like what you see here at WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored on YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. Also, check out our Bitcoin address below, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out at steemit.com. We're at Josh Sigurdson. It's a future of social media where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency. Steem, that is. So make sure to check us out there. Make sure to join us at Anarchapulco 2019 with people like Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, of course, Jeff Berwick, Vid Jedlicka. So many incredible speakers are going to be speaking. It's just a massively growing event. It is something you have to see to believe. So make sure to check it out below and save money on your tickets by using promo code WAM, that's WAM, and I hope to see you there. Also, check out our newsletter as we are getting demonetized and censored and all that. We don't know what comes next, so we have an email, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com. Send us an email with subject line YES, YES, and we will include you in the newsletter where we will continuously keep you updated. So until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.